This is Pharma Forum web editor Nicole Raleigh, and I am here today in Madrid, live at the Veeva Commercial Summit. And I have with me Chris Moore, President of Europe for Veeva Systems. A pleasure to speak with you again, Chris.
Great to speak with you as well, Nicole.
So today we're going to talk about the commercial trends in biopharma in 2024, influenced by the summit itself. But earlier this year, you and I were at the R&D and Quality Summit, and we spoke about the state of clinical trials in both the UK and Europe, and NHS burden, and of course the Veeva Digital Trials platform. We also briefly discussed AI and ChatGPT in an age of automation and electronic data capture. That positive attitude to digital has certainly continued into the commercial summit, and I'd like to begin our conversation today with discussion of AI. So it's been a veritable buzzword this year, but rather than addressing it too broadly, I'd like to focus in the first instance on the importance of its accurate usage.
Yeah, no, this is, it's almost impossible not to talk about AI right now in our industry, isn't it? And actually, it's a great question, because I think the use of AI in our industry, there's a lot of hope, expectation, but also a tinge of hype as well. Mm-hmm. And so I think from our perspective, the way that we're thinking about this is there are elements of where AI is useful already, and there's areas where AI is not yet ready for the mainstream. And you quite rightfully sort of called out generative AI as being the exciting area right now. AI is being used to capture a broad array of robotics, analytics, all the way up to generative AI. And it's worth just picking that apart slightly, because I think there's value in some things that fall under this big catch-all. So starting with the areas where we believe there is great opportunity, we certainly see around base automation. So taking a repetitive task that humans do today, but not necessarily their favorite activity in any day, but are still costly and time consuming. And those are some of the areas which are really suit automation. Mm-hmm. So in our world, in clinical, back to our previous conversation, we have a TMF bot which captures the documentation around clinical studies, automatically categorizes it and puts it into the system. It's an important compliant job, but actually a human neither enjoys doing it but can't do it as well as a machine now. So actually it's perfect for automation. Another area where true generative AI is becoming particularly useful is as an assistant. And so there are technologies out there right now. I mean, just calling out ChatGPT as being one example of that from OpenAI, Microsoft, and the way that can be now integrated in with Teams to record the notes from a meeting, such as our conversation right now, where it would capture what you said, what I said, and could assign actions to each of us based on our conversation. That is a great thing. No one likes being the note taker in the meeting, no. And it's something that enables people to focus on what they're saying. However, even with that, there's a little risk in a compliant industry such as ours. So, and that's the catch with generative AI. Unlike machine learning or traditional analytics, you quite often can get into a situation where you don't know the genesis of the decision, and you can get a different answer from the same algorithm if you ask the same question twice. And that, of course, doesn't work with a compliant industry where you need to show consistency in your decisions to be able to make sure that you're making the right decisions. So let me give you an example of that. If a rep is meeting with a doctor and I'm using generative AI to capture it, and I don't check my notes, it could have caught the conversation incorrectly. Mm. And in doing so, it could have, instead of just talking about the drug within the bounds of what you're allowed to talk about it, it could capture a comment which could be taken incorrectly and be used as an example of bad behavior in an interaction. But once it's recorded, if it's not checked, it's then a discoverable item. So again, just being very careful, even on an innocuous thing like taking notes, there's a risk there. Now, if you take that forward into some of the other areas, if it's into true generative AI usage, there's opportunities potentially looking for drug candidates where, you know, you could potentially identify a particular pathway and a target protein, and that's one potential use. The advantage there is that can be checked by a human to see that you haven't gone catastrophically wrong. Another area where generative AI is not yet at the same level as machine learning is that we've used machine learning to be able to diagnose diseases effectively. And there are examples in place today, such as HIV. There was some interesting work done all around epilepsy as well, where you could codify what made a good diagnosis and you could use it. And that was something that you can actually categorize as a medical device because it's repeatable. If you ask it the question and then I ask it the question, it'll give you the same answer. So you can check it. So that works really well. But generative AI, if you're getting a different answer, that's risky. Because when generative AI gets it wrong, it can be catastrophically wrong. And unlike human beings, it doesn't have the notion of common sense. So from the spectrum of AI encapsulating automation through to true generative, I think there are examples of where it can be used, but there's cautions associated with it. And that then brings you on neatly into the next area of how can you make it better. The analytics, whether it's machine learning or generative AI, are totally reliant on the quality of the data that you give it. So if you look at open domain sources, you've got no control over that. And there were some great examples early on which the training data taught the AI tools very bad behaviors, be those misogynist or racist, because that was the training data that it had. Now, what we see in our industry is you don't have that luxury. It's funny when it's in a newspaper article, it's really bad when it's a medicine. So in our world, actually high quality, harmonized data is really valuable. And so on the one hand, on the absolute extreme of treatments and suggestions for treatments, but even down to the notion of coming up with the next best action for a rep, what should they do next? And certainly where we see our role at Veeva is doing the grindy work, the hard bit of giving harmonized data, and then working with our partners for them to use their algorithms on top of it to help pharma companies where appropriate.
Okay, so if we talk about this grindy work and Veeva, where does this all apply and what's the impact of it within specialised or personalised medicine?
That's a great question. So I think if you think about, and we've talked about this in the past, this sort of notion, and in fact we heard it here at Summit with the panel with physicians. They actually want, physicians, KOLs want input from the industry. They want to understand what new treatments are, how to use them. They want medical education. But it's got to be useful, and each interaction has to be useful, and each interaction should build off the previous interaction, whether it was you talking to them first or me talking to them. Whoever goes next should be a step beyond where we each covered previously. And that's quite difficult. It's quite difficult unless you bring all the information about that interaction together, unless you understand that individual and what their journey is, what their level of interest, and you understand the information that you have available. So what we do is we make sure that the interaction data, whether it's with medical, clinical, or the field teams, is stored and managed in a consistent way. We take all of that body of information about physicians and make it available in one of our tools, Link, so that you can truly understand about that individual, what they're interested in, the sort of congresses they've been to, so you can form a picture of them. And then ultimately, that will be a great source of information to pull together with when you last saw them, what meetings they're going to, and come up with suggestions as to what the next interaction might look like, or how you might do it. But all of that requires that you've got accurate, harmonised and consistent data, so the algorithm can do its thing on top of it.
Absolutely. So we're talking not just clean data, but high quality data.
Yeah.
And you also went on there, I believe, to this notion that's coming in at the moment of inbound as well as outbound when it comes to engagement with HCPs. Perhaps you could expand on that slightly.
Yeah, this is a really interesting area. If you look at the generational muscle mass of the life sciences industry, it's created an industrial scale a push mechanism for information. So if you're a physician, I go and see you, I talk about what I want to talk about to you. What we actually hear time and time again, and we heard it on stage here at Summit, was that physicians want to speak to those companies who have information that is incremental and useful to them. Mm-hmm. Now, the catch about the current model is that assumes that the visiting MSL or rep turns up at the right time. But actually, for that information to be useful for me, it needs to also be timely. And that may not be when a visit is planned. So, for example, if I've just seen a patient, I want to learn about new oncology treatments in a specific area, a specific tumor type, I need to be able to reach out proactively and find out if that information is there. And so this notion of pull becomes really important. And in fact, we've recently conducted a study where we found that where you make pull channels available so that the physician can actually ask for help, that makes up 30% of all interactions. And we've also seen that those interactions on average answered in about 5 minutes. So all of a sudden you've shifted the whole dynamic. Yeah. And you've become useful because you're actually addressing a real need. And then where we see that usage, we don't just see the pull channels go up, we also see all other channels go up because you've built a real dialogue with the individual.
Okay, so now let's talk about Veeva's specific role in this.
Yes.
Can you tell me more? What are the offerings that you have in order to facilitate this further and indeed better this further? How do you make for this situation where you have the right information at the right time?
Yeah, this is a really great question. As you can imagine, it occupies quite a lot of our thinking and time right now. So one part is that we're in a fairly unique position, which is a lot of this information is generated in the R&D function, which we support. And then it's delivered on an educational basis through the medical teams, and then on a commercial basis through the rep teams. We support all of that, and we track all of those interactions. So, but typically the industry hasn't, for example, learnt from its interactions in clinical and created clear and easy links so that you could transform the or use the clinical data directly in medical, either in terms of who you've spoken to, what you've spoken to them, or in a great example that came up here at this summit, a medical, an MSL going in to meet with a physician and saying, let me tell you all about our pharmaceutical company and this great new treatment we've got. And the physician turned around and said, no, let me tell you all about it because I've just been on your phase 3 pivotal study on this and knew all about it. So it was neither incremental, it didn't build off what had happened before, and it didn't recognise, it squandered that unique position that they had in being a known educator. So we can help to bring all that together. We can also help to recognise that there are multiple touch points from a pharmaceutical company into that physician. But by educating the next person to speak to them on the previous ones that have come before, it isn't a repeat, but it's actually a build on what's happened. And through the feedback loop of content, making sure that we're providing the right content to them at the right time. And then the final element to that, sorry, it's a long answer.
No, not at all.
The final element to that is this pull piece. So we've supported the traditional model of visits, calls, and more recently video. But now what we've done is we've created a compliant mechanism by which the physician can say, I have a question, could you help me? And we're starting to introduce this now to the market. And through this, not only can you receive the question, you can identify the right person to speak to, but you can receive that content in a compliant way that's tracked, so the next interaction is even better and you're not going back to square one. So it's that full piece of joining up clinical to medical to sales and marketing, and using your content effectively according to the needs of the individual.
Yes, so we're talking about closed loop marketing, and the word which perhaps you didn't use is connectivity.
Yeah.
It's all connected, because as you alluded to, there are the three pillars with Veeva, aren't there? There's the development cloud, there's the commercial cloud, and there's the data cloud. So now I want to talk about value, because at the end of the day, it all comes down to money, or cost at least.
Yeah.
So can you tell us how medical will prove pivotal as scrutiny of value for money intensifies in Europe, for example?
Yeah, it's interesting, because there was a McKinsey study shown that medical budgets haven't increased in the last 5 years. Counter to that, though, is the fact that when you speak to HCPs, they say they really value their interactions with medical, because it provides educational information and new data on products that they may not otherwise have. So there's a bit of a gap there. So everyone's kind of known that medical was really useful and effective, but no one's been able to track it. So we've been using our data, our interaction data, to look at what the impact is. And what we've seen is that where MSLs are included pre-launch and used to heavily educate around a treatment 3 months or more in advance of the launch itself, we see an uplift of 1.5 times the prescription of that product, which is just huge. Now, on top of that, what we actually see is the stickiness of the product goes forward into the next year and a half, because you've actually set the market up properly, it's being used in the right way, so you're getting the right outcome, so it tends to be stickier. So it's very much this shift, especially as we move more towards 70% of treatments being in specialty or targeted treatments, making sure that the physician can match the right treatments to the right patients and then therefore get the outcomes.
Okay, so in short, it's about the sort of pressures that are abounding when it comes to biopharma demonstrating value for money alongside that clinical efficacy, and as you said, the adherence factor, which sort of segues nicely. We haven't yet touched upon trends per se as it comes to 2024, but before we go there, I mentioned earlier this focal word at the summit of connectivity.
Yeah.
We've come to that off the back of the buzzword of AI. So when it comes to patients, sites, sponsors, the whole loop, I mean, what's the importance overall? What's your sort of summative statement before you look at your projections?
I think when you take a step back, it's a connected ecosystem, and everyone talks about the patient. The way to make sure the patient gets the right treatment is that they're matched with the right physician. The right physician is probably heavily influenced by the right key opinion leader. So as you think about studying and planning your studies, you need to be targeting the right people for that disease area to ensure that ultimately the patient will get the right treatment. As you then go further and move into pre-launch and launch and taking that to market, it's about educating what are the right conditions for the treatment, what are the outcomes you can expect, and what are the surrounding factors that would maximise that outcome. Ultimately, though, it still goes straight back to right treatment, right patient, right time. But the industry's role is it's generating treatments for diseases and areas that just haven't been able to be treated in the past. And we're seeing life-threatening diseases become chronic diseases over time, where they can be treated, or in many cases now, actually wiped out. But all of that requires the ecosystem to work correctly. And where you do get great medical advances, that the prescribing physicians know about them through their ecosystem of KOLs, so that they can use them effectively. That's why we talk about R&D needing to be joined up with commercial, and recognizing that the data, although it's used for different things at different points in the drug's life cycle, actually builds a picture that increases the outcome.
And that trial to treatment notion that Paul mentioned yesterday.
Yes, very much.
Okay, Chris, so lastly, your predictions for 2024.
Wow.
Those you want to share.
Yeah. So I think we'll see several things. I think we're on a path with the importance of medical. I think it will just accelerate. And I think as we start putting more metrics behind its impact on right treatments, right patients, right time, we're going to see ever more focus on that. That's going to trigger more of a connected working between clinical and medical, better information, right time, right place. I think we are going to we're going to very much sort of see the advent of true push-pull engagement, and the notion that a really effective interaction is one that's useful. And the only way of reversing the number of physicians now who are saying, I no longer want to meet with the industry, which we put at half, by the way, and getting them to be more open, is to make sure that when those interactions happen, they're higher value. So pull increases the value, great content increases the value, and then making sure that every interaction you have builds on the last one. True omni-channel interaction also increases the value of the interaction. So I think it's really those. You said it beautifully actually in your questions. Connectivity is going to be key, the role of medical is going to be key, connecting organisations better and connecting with the needs of physicians and KOLs.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you as ever.